Hello everyone, my name is Emily Rudy and I am a senior ecology, evolution, and organismal biology major. And today I'm going to be presenting to you on the endangered species, the Taita Hills warty frog. Its scientific name is Calulina dewita. And really quickly before we jump to the next slide, because I know PowerPoint won't let me go back, I just want to point out the brown coloration of this particular color morph of the warty frog. So with that being said, some of the most prominent phenotypic characteristics of this frog are its coloration, which is variable between light and dark brown, as we saw on the last slide, as well as gray, and then some orange and yellow variations, which can be seen on this frog here to the right. They have a unique toe arrangement to where their hind feet are arranged in like two opposable groups that point backwards. And you can kind of see on the individual who's holding this frog's hand the way that their toes are arranged facing backwards. Very clearly, they have a warty skin texture, and something that's also interesting is that males have a larger tympanum than females. Now, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor on this recording, but the tympanum, if you don't know anything about frogs, is typically behind the eye. It's a circular shape. The tympanum on these frogs is not as noticeable and as prominent as something like an American bullfrog, but it is still there. Right around there. Alrighty, so these frogs have an average weight of about 5 to 8 grams. One thing I do want to say is that these frogs are very understudied. So this weight really is a broad generalization. There's not much data talking about the actual weight of these frogs. Females are typically longer and larger than males, so females can reach up to 55 millimeters in length, while males can reach 35 millimeters in length. And then the IUCN lists this species as critically endangered. This was last assessed, the completion of the assessment was on July 25th, 2014. The scope of the assessment is global, so it's not just that one isolated population in one area is critically endangered, their entire global range is endangered, and the overall population trend is decreasing. So the taxonomy for these frogs is their class is Amphibia, the order is Anura, and the family is Brevicipedidae. Now, I tried very hard to find an up-to-date phylogeny, and then I also tried to create one myself, but that crashed and burned very quickly. So there is no up-to-date phylogeny that I could find in any academic journals or online in general, and that is because of taxonomy and the way that taxonomy is ever-changing. Previously, the Brevicipedids and Calulina dewita were considered part of the family Microhylidae, which are the narrowmouth frogs, and Brevicipedidae was recognized as a subfamily of Microhylidae. However, in more recent years, taxonomists and biologists and people who research these frogs have deemed that they deserve to be recognized as their own taxon family. So Brevicipedidae is now recognized as its own family, the rain frogs, and their closest sister taxon, which is also used to be a microhylid subfamily, has also now been recognized as its own family, and those are the shovel-nosed frogs, being the Hemosodidaes. The full taxonomy is kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Amphibia, order Anura, family Brevicipedidae, genus Calulina, and species Calulina dewita. So as far as their global distribution is concerned, here on the right side of the slide, I have two maps. One is a line map, the other is a more satellite image map showing the landscape. I apologize that you can't necessarily see the line map as well because the screen of my face is right there. But these were provided by the Amphibia Web Satellite Imaging and Sampling. And the green area shows where these frogs have residency, where they reside. One thing that I want to point out, as I've already mentioned, is that these frogs are significantly understudied and under-researched, and that is why if you'll look at the legend that I provided with the little purple scaling, there's only 1 point observation that they have for this research map that they've created. Now, as far as their habitat is concerned, they are found in the Taita Hills of Kenya. They are restricted to the Dawida and the Mbololo parts of the forest, which are different sectors in the Taita Hill Forest. There have been some research efforts trying to find residency of these frogs in the Sagal and Kasaigu blocks in the sectors of the Taita forest. However, these research efforts have been unsuccessful. That doesn't mean that these frogs are not there, but they do not have any records of these species from their efforts trying to find them. And I believe the most recent effort done was a while ago in 2015. So that's the most current research that I found as far as where they're located is concerned, and I could not find any current accounts of them, but they very well may be there. They just have not been documented there. As far as habitat ecology preferences go, these frogs prefer moist, wet leaf litter and decomposing tree bark, tree logs, tree branches, etc. They will also burrow into the wet mud on the forest floor. And these animals, I'm going to mention later on, are pretty active in the evening and at night, and they can be found on low-hanging tree branches that are close to the forest floor, as well as shrubs that aren't that high up off of the ground. Now, as far as their diet goes, their main food source are insects. So I have a few pictures of insects right here. I just want to note that all of these photos that I found were documented in the Taita cloud forest in Kenya. So these are all species that this picture was taken in Kenya, or at least that's what the article said. But the different species that I have include the longhorn beetle, the robber fly, the black and white root maggot fly, and the black vine weevil. One interesting thing about these frogs that I did not know before researching them is that they can be cannibalistic. So these frogs quite literally have been found to eat everything and anything they possibly can, which sometimes includes each other. Some fun facts about this frog is that their calls are a very fast burr sound, and their highest frequency of the call reaches 1.6 kilohertz, which is compared to a high-pitched clapping sound. Now, I tried to embed the sound of this, but it wasn't working with the recording, like me trying to record this, so I'm just going to do it for you. So it kind of sounds like this, and I'm not a frog, so bear with me, but okay. That's kind of what it would sound like if a human were trying to recreate it. Another interesting fact is that they are nocturnal. Like I already mentioned, they burrow in mud and leaf litter during the day, and then at night climb trees and shrubs to catch prey and insects. They are a solitary species, and this means that throughout the duration of their lives, they typically live their lives alone. The only time they come into contact with other frogs, specifically females, is during courtship for the mating and breeding season. Something that's really interesting is that these frogs can walk on their hind limbs for short periods of time instead of doing the typical jump movement that frogs do. I don't know of any other frogs that do that. I'm sure there are if this frog does it. I'm sure there are at least more rain frogs that can do this, but that's pretty interesting. And the last thing has to do with color morphs. There are certain color morphs of the Taita Hills warty frog where their inner legs, their groins, and their armpits are very red in color. So moving on to the means of imperilment, the first one I want to address is forest fragmentation because of eucalyptus plantations. Now, for those of you that don't know, in Kenya, eucalyptus is a very successful tree species that they grow and harvest for economic purposes, and that is because it's a very successful hardwood. The tree itself and the species itself accounts for 10% of tree plantation establishments. So it might not seem like a lot, but for one single species to account for 10% of the plantation establishment, like out of all tree species and all plantations that are in Kenya, that is a large amount. The second means of imperilment is forest fragmentation for pine forests. Now, pine forests have been planted in Kenya because pine trees are very fast growing. They provide hard quality timber, and because of this, they are preferred by commercial forestry companies. This is one of their preferred species. That's because they grow fast, they provide good quality timber, and they make a lot of profit and contribution to the economy and economic gain for those companies that are planting them. The last means of imperilment that I want to address is inbreeding. Now, we've talked a lot about habitat fragmentation and degradation, and so we know that when habitat becomes fragmented or degraded or lost, and populations become isolated as a result of this fragmentation, that causes inbreeding. And so because of this inbreeding, we have a result in reduced heterozygosity, different deleterious allele fixation, as well as an overall population decline because of all of those things. On the right here, you can see a frog that just has a genetic mutation to where the foot appendage or apparatus is not there except for this little tiny nubbin on the right. And that's because, as I said earlier, when you isolate these populations, they have less people to mate with in a smaller geographical space, and then repeated breeding between those same populations is what creates that inbreeding, and it's causing the deleterious alleles and effects of inbreeding depressions to ultimately kill these frogs and shorten their lifespan. As far as their population viability is concerned, this was probably the most depressing part of research that I found throughout this presentation. There really are absolutely no numbers for how many frogs in this species are left in the world. I looked high and low, searched far and wide, and I probably found about 20 different sources, and not a single one of them gave a number for even a guesstimate of how many frogs are left. And even the IUCN recognizes on their page for the Taita Hills warty frog that there's very much insufficient data to be able to identify a specific population size, which is why it is unknown. We do know that the population is severely fragmented, and that 50% of the remaining population of these frogs is distributed between the isolated and fragmented population parts of the Taita forest, which causes the species to be very rare, which is probably why they have not found documents of this species in the Sagal and the Kasaigu parts of the Taita Hills forest, and why right now they are said to be restricted to the Dawida and the Mbalolo parts of the forest. So moving on to recovery efforts, one of the biggest things that's happening in Kenya right now is creating federally or governmentally protected regions of the forest. And so protecting forest patches in the Taita Hills, these are being protected because they're being designated as key biodiversity areas. Now, I want to bring up the Dawida Biodiversity Conservation Group. This group is doing so much in Kenya. They have 13 different constituent groups that offer various resources, education tactics, and activist groups that are fighting for more protected regions in the government. And the conservation group has been doing a lot for the species, trying to specify different parts of the forest to deem as protected that have the best suitable habitat for these frogs. However, I do want to note that because of the economic situation in Kenya, while these areas are being protected and more areas are being named as protected, they can still be interrupted by fuel wood harvestings from locals and individuals that live near and around the forest, because the sad part of it is they don't want to cut their economic profits in half or in a quarter or in 3/4 and have that drastic decrease. The second recovery effort that's really awesome to see and interesting is the fact that the Kenyan government has marked several different eucalyptus and pine plantations for conversion to take down the plantation to get rid of the eucalyptus and pine species and to replant the original indigenous forest tree species, shrub species, so that these habitats can eventually get back to the climax community at which they once were, and so that all the species that previously occupied them can occupy them again. I did find this news article right here from 2009, August 25th. It is from the Kenyan government, from Capital News, saying that the government has issued a directive to the Nyayo Tea Zone Development Cooperation to stop further plantation of the contentious eucalyptus trees in the 11,000 hectare zone. And so this is awesome and interesting because not only are they trying to return these fragmented habitats back to their original climax community, which we all know is long term, but in the short term and for the foreseeable future, they are also banning the plantation of new eucalyptus plantation and pine forest, so that no more habitats are further fragmented, so that these frogs and a wide variety of other endangered species in the Taita Hills forest do not become more endangered, more critically endangered, and eventually extinct. The last recovery effort I want to chat about are research efforts. Everyone knows that endangered species need funding to understand their reproductive biology, their life history biology, habitat, mating, feeding mechanisms, all that good stuff, in order to have a legitimately successful way and mechanism to rehabilitate their population size and the population overall. Now, I've read a few articles talking about how different researchers in the Kenyan government have launched a plan to better study their life history biology because this species is so understudied. And the hopes of doing that and completing these studies on their life history and reproductive biology is that they will be able to perfect the mechanism at which they breed these Taita warty frogs in captivity while maintaining their heterozygosity, so that once they figure out how to restore the population size as far as numbers are concerned, they can restock the Taita Hills cloud forest with this species. And this is obviously noted as a long-term strategy because research takes time. My slogan for this presentation, and I'm gonna mispronounce the first half of it on purpose just for the sake of rhyming, but my slogan is thank the breves, tank the trees, safeguard the Taita. And the breves, the brevicipedids, the family at which the Callulina dovida species falls underneath of, tank the trees. Let's get rid of these eucalyptus plantations and pine forests and return them to their original habitat. And then in turn, by doing all of these things, safeguard the Taita. The Taita Hills warty frog is definitely an interesting species that deserves our attention. It deserves money and fiscal efforts to protect this species. It is critically endangered, so if it's going to receive help and aid, we really need to do that now. So thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed it.